Forms are one of the most important aspects to any application since they provide a way for users to give input back to the application. In this lesson, we will be building a sign-up page while learning about how to build forms with Vuetify, common input types that you should be aware of, and what pickers are and how we can use them to enhance the user experience of our forms. Let's dive right in. When building a form with standard HTML, it's as simple as having a root element of form. In Vuetify, it's not very different. We simply prepend the form with V- in order to give us access to functionality that we'll learn about later on in this course. Of course, the real question is how do form inputs work in Vuetify? In HTML, a standard input type of text requires you to have a label and an input. However, Vuetify makes this easier for us by condensing the label and input into a single element, where the label can now be assigned as a prop, and we can still assign standard HTML attributes such as type in our vText field. As an added bonus, we no longer have to worry about pairing the for and ID attributes together since Vuetify takes care of that for us. And so, with a single line of code, we have a beautiful text input with a proper label. Let's go ahead and build our signup page. We'll start by opening router.js and defining the new route, just like we did for all the other pages. So we'll give it a path of /signup and a name of signup. And for the component, we'll use the anonymous function and we'll import the signup view, which we will create shortly. We'll create a template block, and I always like to just start by making sure an H1 renders on the page before moving on. We'll open up Browser Preview in our VS Code editor. And when we visit the signup URL, you can see our H1 appears as normal. It's missing in our navigation, so let's add that in app.view. Looks great. Now that we've scaffolded our signup page, for our signup form, the user should be able to input their email address, select which browser they use, attach their profile photo, input their birthday, and agree to terms and conditions. So let's get started. We'll start by closing out all the files that we don't need. Then we'll go ahead and lay out our form using the layout components container, row, and column, which we learned about earlier in this course. Once we save, you can see that the proper spacing is now appearing. We'll then add our vForm, which will serve as the root node for our forms, and we'll add a text field, which will have a label of email and a type of email. As you can see now, when we click in here, users can now add an email. Great. And just like that, users can now input their email address. Next, we want users to be able to select which browser they use. Looking at the available components, you may be inclined to choose the select component, which is standard for any HTML form. However, I want to introduce you to the autocomplete component, which allows users to type in and get their search results filtered and then select it. And it's as easy as using the v-autocomplete and providing it a label and an items prop, which takes an array of values. Back in our code editor, all we need to do is v-autocomplete and give it a label of which browser do you use. Once we save, you can see that when we click inside the autocomplete, no data is currently available. And that's to be expected since we still haven't defined the items that will be provided. So we'll go ahead and create a script block and create a data store with the browsers that we want to provide the autocomplete. And we'll give it Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, and Brave. Now that we've saved, you can see no data is still available, and that's because we need to make sure to pass that data into the items prop. We'll vbind items to watch browser, and with that, once we save, you can see now that all our browsers are appearing as desired and the autocomplete works as expected. And with that, users can now select which browser they use using autocomplete. Next, we'll want to let users attach their profile photo. For those familiar with input types, you may be inclined to use the type file. I want to introduce you to the new file input component in Vuetify, which can be identified by v-file-input. Let's go ahead and use that. We'll add the v-file component to our form and give it a label of attached profile picture. Once we save, we can see that Vuetify has made it easy for users to tell that they're about to attach a file. Back in our browser, when we click on the input, you'll see that it opens the File Explorer and allows us to easily attach a file of our choosing. And with that, we've completed the third requirement. Next, we want to enable users to input their birthday. With this requirement, it's time to introduce you to pickers, which are a set of components that Vuetify has to enhance the user experience of form input by giving users beautiful user interfaces to do things such as select colors, or in our case, choosing the date. As you can see, it has a gorgeous interface that allows us to easily switch months or jump back to see the year overview. And using it is as simple as adding one line of code, vDate Picker. And with one line of code, we have our beautiful date picker. But we need users to know that it's for their birthday. So we'll start by attaching a vModel directive to the data property of birthday, which will assign an empty string. Then, we'll add a text field input with a label of birthday and assign it a vModel of birthday so that it's associated with the date picker. Finally, we'll give it a read-only property so that when users click into the input and type, nothing happens. And so they're encouraged to use the date picker, which automatically updates the text field, as you can see here. You may be wondering how one should toggle the visibility of the date picker based on whether the user has focus on the text input or not. To show you how this works, let's jump over to the docs. Under the example section in the date picker documentation, there's a date picker's example for showing how it can appear as a dialog for the text input or in a modal. However, the source code to make this happen is rather complex since we have to make sure that the entire form input is accessible to everyone. Since this code requires more advanced knowledge of Vue that goes beyond the scope of this course, just know that this example is here whenever you're ready. Now that users can input their birthday, we just have one final thing, allowing users to agree to the terms and conditions. Although you might be inclined to try to use the text field and give it a typed checkbox like you would in HTML, all you have to do in Vuetify is use the v-checkbox component. We'll give it a label of agree to terms and conditions. And with that, once we save, you can see now that it looks great. I want to go ahead and also show you the vSwitch component, which is another common design pattern that functions exactly like a checkbox, but looks a little bit different since you're toggling a switch. However, since the checkbox is more common for terms and conditions, we'll go ahead and switch it back. Finally, to wrap up our form, we'll add a V button with the type of submit and a color of primary and with the text of submit. And so once we save, there we go. Our sign-up form is now complete. In this lesson, we've learned about the basics for creating forms with Vuetify, common input types that you should know about, and how to use pickers to enhance the user experience of our form inputs. While we have only used a few of the form input types that Vuetify offers us, I hope you've caught a glimpse of just how easy forms can be when you use Vuetify. In the next lesson, we'll be covering another important aspect of forms, validation. See you there. We've covered quite a bit of ground this lesson. We've covered quite a bit of ground this lesson. We've covered quite a We've covered quite a bit of ground this lesson. We've covered quite a bit. We've covered quite a bit of ground. We've covered ooh. We've covered quite a bit of ground this lesson. Okay, I'm not even gonna do that part in this lesson. Okay. And out.